Number 10.
I need to kill Oscar. Ashley, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him.
That was 17-year-old Dylan Shymaker, who fatally beat his girlfriend's 23-month-old son. I mean, is this real life right now? I watched videos about this kid's case, and his lawyers were trying to justify that Dylan has an anger problem. He didn't mean to kill the 23-month-old baby. He didn't know how to control himself. I'm not sure why there are lawyers defending people like this, you know, defending killers. That little baby didn't have a chance at life. What is his lawyers thinking? What are they fighting for?
But there were other dynamics at work there, including my client's inability to either control his anger or frustration and his inexperience in babysitting.
So this took place in Buffalo in the States, and jurors convicted Dylan of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 15 years to life in prison, which is the maximum punishment in Buffalo. Moving into number 9, we have this girl who freaked out after she was given a life sentence. She was hyperventilating, like
Slow down.
So just before the panic attacks were happening, this girl fell to the ground and she started yelling in the courtroom. The woman's family was also freaking out. Alright, number 8.
I gotta wake up every day with that. So, just ask. Actually, I don't ask. I'm just sorry.
I know it's hard to understand what this kid is saying, but he's begging for forgiveness. It's a hard video to watch. I know people make mistakes, but killing someone isn't something that society can forgive, or can they?
John, is there anything you want to say before sentencing?
Well, that was 17-year-old John Freeman, who was saying sorry to the victim's family after he strangled a 5-year-old girl to death. I mean, in that moment, was he really sorry? This also took place near Buffalo, and he was given 25 years to life, and this is for a second-degree murder in which John Freeman pleaded guilty to. So when John turns 42 years old, a judge will determine whether or not John is a danger to himself or to society, and if he's going to be released. Hopefully, if he is released, he's a changed person. There are also many people who have served a number of years to life who just don't get released from prison because they're just always deemed as a danger to society. So although you get like 15 years to life, you can serve like 50 years. Alright, moving into number 7, we have this. You couldn't see the guy I'm talking about during this part of the video, but who you're about to see is 19-year-old Dexter Johnson, who is 19 years old at the time, so he raged out in court when he was given the death sentence. I guess he has nothing else to lose. This is what this guy looks like.
Punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
All rise.
The jurors convicted Dexter Johnson of capital murder. Dexter was involved in a carjacking, robbery, rape, and murder of 23-year-old Maria Paris. Dexter is now 28 years old, and he's still on death row. And right now, he does not have an execution date. Although someone is given the death penalty, it takes a very long time to go through the whole process. Do you guys believe in the death penalty? Sound off in the comment section. At number 6, we now have teenager Samantha Grigg, who was charged for murdering a Michigan State University student, Dustin Frolka.
Grigg pleaded guilty to unarmed robbery and manslaughter in Frolka's death. The 19-year-old's body was found along I-69 last February. He had been beaten with brass knuckles, robbed.
This case just doesn't seem to make sense to me. 16-year-old Samantha at the time decided to plan a kidnapping to rob and kill Frolka. I mean, she's 16. How do you have these thoughts? She had someone help her as well, and that was 18-year-old Tyrell Bredernitz. So the reason why this doesn't make sense, because it does seem like Samantha had a really bright future. She threw it all away. She was actually a lead singer of her band, and she was actually quite good.
Singer in a band.
Number 5, we have this teenager who, after given his sentencing, turned around and just attacks the people in the first row. I think it was the victim's family. Yeah, luckily the police was right there to get on top of the situation, to handle the situation before anyone got hurt. All right, number 4.
Can't, they understand the seriousness of the crime.
Barbeau will almost certainly start his prison sentence at the Department of Corrections, Lincoln Hills School for Boys, north of Wausau.
That was 15-year-old Antonio Barbeau at the time of his trial. This one is pretty messed up, but he was given a life sentence for killing his great-grandmother back in 2012. He was just 13 years old. Antonio and his friend killed his great-grandmother with a hatchet and a hammer. The great-grandmother was 78 years old, and this is just so sickening. Antonio won't be eligible for release until he's 50 years old. The article I was reading about this stated that Antonio's lawyers said the punishment was cruel and unusual. I mean, are they freaking kidding me? There's no way that the lawyer actually said this in court. How does that lawyer even sleep at night trying to get this killer out to the public sooner? The reason why Antonio killed his great-grandmother was for money. It's so sickening. I think the punishment wasn't cruel enough, but that's just my opinion. Moving into number 3, we have an 18-year-old who was sentenced to 20 years in state prison for using a dating app to set up a robbery that resulted in a shootout. In the footage I'm about to play for you guys, I really feel bad for this mother who is just so hurt. Once she finds out her daughter was charged and sentenced to 20 years in prison, she totally loses it. She freaks out, and then the teenager starts to freak out as well. This one is really sad. Watch.
20 years in state prison.
The teenager was then quickly taken out of the courtroom by police officers, and the mother was just left there to cry. She was so heartbroken, and I would be as well if I found out that my kid committed a robbery and guns were used and then they were sentenced to 20 years in prison. It's like you lost them. I'm not sure if she is even able to get out of prison sooner, but she did use a deadly weapon during this robbery that could have resulted in someone losing their life. Do you guys think that 20 years was, maybe too harsh of a punishment for this crime? All right, number 2.
Saying pull the trigger that killed your son, masturbates to memory. All of you.
Sentencing Lane to life in prison, Judge David Fury said he lacked remorse and had feigned mental illness.
So this guy might look familiar to you guys, and to be honest with you, I don't care if this guy gets left in prison and forgotten about for the rest of his life. So who you just saw was TJ Lane, the teenager who was in front of a judge for sentencing for a school shooting in Ohio back in 2012. TJ was 17 years old when he shot and killed 3 students and injured another 3. Although TJ was a minor at the time of the attack during the sentencing, he was tried as an adult and he was given 3 life sentences in prison without parole. Well, just a few years after the attack, he was actually able to escape prison. This was just 8 days before his birthday, and he escaped from Allen Correctional Institution in Ohio along with 2 other inmates. He was able to escape using a makeshift ladder. They used it to scale down a fence during recreation hours. One of the men was quickly recaptured, but TJ and another man who was serving a 12-year sentence for aggravated robbery and burglary and kidnapping remained at large. Police conducted a nationwide search and told nearby residents to lock their doors. Eventually, both men were captured, and TJ was then put into a small cell for 23 hours a day, and he stayed there until he awaited for his transfer to a maximum security prison. A prison where hopefully you can't make a makeshift ladder and escape again. And finally, at number 1, we have this scary freakout from a California teenager who was begging to not go to prison. That was 18-year-old Fernando Elgato, who was accused of rape. He denies all claims, and he was freaking out when he was being sentenced because he was actually afraid of going back to prison. For some reason, he thought that if he fought back, he would somehow be released.
Scared of returning to jail, 18-year-old...
I feel really bad for this kid because if he actually didn't do it, he just appeared in front of a judge, he got sentenced, and now he's going back to prison where I don't really know what happens there. I can only imagine. Okay, so starting us off like we always do with number 10.
By Judge Rebecca Dallett, who gave him life without parole, sparking the outburst.
So that was 19-year-old Sandell Jackson, who appeared in front of a Milwaukee County Circuit judge who was sentencing him. Sandell was charged with first-degree intentional homicide and attempted robbery in the shooting death of a 21-year-old. Sandell pleaded guilty to the felony murder charges. He was given a life sentence, but was hoping for a chance at parole at some point of his sentencing, but the judge denied it, and that's when Sandell started to freak out. And everyone else in the courtroom was freaking out as well. Now at number 9, we have a girl who freaked out so bad, she started hiccuping. Like it was just uncontrollably. And I remember one time I hiccuped for like 6 months straight. It was really weird, so.
The parents testified, has a history of being someone who can be manipulated.
So this teenager, Jennifer Mee, was being tried in court for a murder charge, and she just couldn't keep calm. She was freaking out while being handcuffed. Jennifer Mee actually became famous after that video, and after years, she finally talked about that viral video.
What happened to that sweet 15-year-old girl that we first met?
I couldn't even tell you. I got cased up with the wrong crowd of people, really. Unfortunately, when I started experimenting with drugs, I just felt like I was invincible to everything.
Now she will be facing the rest of her life in prison, and she may not have the opportunity to ever leave. During the interview, she said that she thinks she deserves about 20 years, but not more than that.
Personally, I feel would be fair is at least 20 years. I do, because yes, somebody's life was taken, somebody's loved one, somebody's child.
Your attorney has said now there's less than a 1 to 2% chance of you ever getting out of here. How do you hold on to hope?
I can't put nothing past God, but I've been locked up since I was 19. I can't stop fighting. I have a family that wants me home.
Next up, at number 8, we have 17-year-old Racelyn Martin, who pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, and this is after he killed his 63-year-old grandfather with a hatchet. Is this real life right now? He was sentenced to life in prison, and during court, Martin was freaking out. And this guy was just shaking. He was so scared. He was terrified of what was going to happen to him. Well, what else do you think is going to happen to you? Yeah, buddy, you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life. Okay, let's watch that again, but I'll slow it down a bit for you guys. It must be a very difficult case because both of his parents testified against him.
And appeared to be listening intently to testimony, occasionally nervously looking down. Tonight we heard testimony from both parents.
Moving into number 7, we have the youngest on our list, 13-year-old Kashawn Mann, who became the youngest person who committed murder in Kent County. Kashawn killed his mom's boyfriend. So after Kashawn's mom actually tried defending her 13-year-old son, the victim's family were outraged and chaos pursued in the courtroom.
That angered relatives of the victim, Jermel Stokes, leading to a scuffle.
The mom was saying that she actually found out her boyfriend was abusing her son and the murder was justified. I don't think that any murder can be justified, and also the mom was fighting for her son to not be tried as an adult. This is a crazy situation because you have this young kid who is abused, and now because of poor decisions, he's going to prison for the rest of his life.
This is a child. Yes, he may have committed an adult crime.
The judge was about to sentence her son, Kashawn Mann, for second-degree murder.
But obviously, after it all comes out, he was treated in ways that I had no clue of. So we can't say that, oh, he was never mistreated.
Moving into number 6.
Court physically shaking throughout the hearing. Then the sentence was read.
So therefore, it's the sentence of this court, Mr. Rose, that you be sentenced to serve a minimum of 10 years to a maximum of 15 years in prison.
So that was Stacy Rose Jr., who just couldn't believe his sentencing. Rose Jr. was caught up in a fight when 49-year-old Briscoe came outside to break up the fight. He was a father of one of the teenagers. He's also a father of 5 and a grandfather to 3 grandchildren. Rose Jr. fled the scene on foot through the neighborhood, but eyewitnesses was able to tell the police who the killer was, and he was quickly arrested. Outside of the courthouse, Rose Jr.'s mom was freaking out because she couldn't believe his sentencing.
So my son wasn't a drug dealer. They went over there and stole them pills out of his car.
Rose Jr. was very shocked to know he was sentenced for so long. He claims it was an accident. This teen was just shaking like crazy in the courtroom, and he was just crying right after his sentence. Alright, so at number 5, we have someone who isn't even a teenager yet, and she was freaking out. She appeared on an episode of Beyond Scared Straight. I love that show, and I love how they're such bad kids, they get reformed, and then they turn out to be okay kids. But the episode I'm going to show you guys is about a wannabe 12-year-old girl who thinks she's tough. Her name's Ashanti. And this girl was on track, to serve the rest of her life behind bars, because she just seems so violent. Who knows what this little girl is capable of as she gets older.
I'm Ashanti, I'm 12, I like fighting, I threaten people, and I'm in the squad.
She's kind of speaking too gangster for me. I can barely hear what the heck she is saying, but from what I heard, she's not afraid of nobody. Well, until she was taken to a prison to see what her life was going to be like if she didn't change. Well, what you're about to see is someone who I've never seen be so afraid of anything before. This girl is just freaking out and just losing her mind, and she's like squealing, I think.
We're getting closer and closer. They are gonna love that hair back here, buddy. Here we go. Ain't no time to cry now, sister. Ain't no time to cry.
Okay, what the heck is even happening? She's just in panic mode. I'm not sure how tough this girl really is. Her tough act just seems to be fake. She's not ready for the real prison world. If she was, she wouldn't be acting like that. Number 4, we have teenager Roxana Silvorsky, who was emotionally freaking out in court while she was being sentenced. Silvorsky pleaded guilty to plotting to kill her family. Is this real life right now? Imagine being her family member and you just found out that this teenager, your daughter, your sister, she was plotting on murdering you. Well, luckily she was brought in by the police before anything bad happened, and now she is serving a very long time in a women's correctional facility. Number 3, I actually just wanted to show you guys quickly a different perspective, the opposite of someone freaking out in court, and he seemed to have zero emotions while he was being sentenced. I mean, watch this.
It is hereby ordered that you be committed to the Department of Youth Services until the age of 21, and furthermore committed to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction.
This kid was just sentenced to over 40 years in prison, and he didn't even flinch. He was just 14 years old when he stabbed his teacher to death. I mean, I don't know, is he freaking out inside? Number 2.
That's an extreme recklessness, and that's intent, that's maliciousness, that's a definition of malice.
So that was 17-year-old Jacob Morgan from Rock Hill, South Carolina. He found himself in court after he was charged with arson and murder connected with his 14-year-old brother's death. Prosecutors claimed that Morgan maliciously and intentionally started a fire. Morgan was so shocked when he was sentenced.
So therefore, I am going to find that there is probable cause to charge the individual with the found over 4 years.
His life just flashed before his eyes. He didn't think that he would get such a long sentence. He was charged for manslaughter, so he received 10 years for that, and another 15 years for arson, which to me it kind of doesn't make sense because, well, let's think about it for a sec. 10 years for killing someone, 15 years for setting a house on fire. I mean, I don't know. Finally, number 1.
See you, ladies and gentlemen.
I count at least 20 officers in that room to retain 19-year-old Dexter Johnson. He was sentenced to death, so yeah, he was pretty pissed off.
The jury has found you guilty of capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
So Johnson sat down and he kind of let it sit in for a few seconds when he was sentenced. And just a few minutes went by when he realized that there's nothing else to lose. This guy just loses his cool and he just freaks out into a rage. I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but the woman in front just booked into the floor as if there was like a gunman in the room. She was just super scared. It seemed to come out of nowhere. And luckily there were so many police officers around because you never know what else Johnson would be capable of doing. I mean, he's already capable of murder. So what's one more murder to his rap sheet? And at number 10, we actually have a teenager who started to freak out after she was denied any possibility of parole. She was really hoping for it. When she was denied, she started to freak out. So what you're about to see is a 19-year-old killer who killed 21-year-old Nathan Potter. The victim's family was very afraid, but they are glad that they're being locked away for life. At least they can sleep at night knowing that a killer won't be out there. Next up, we have a teenager who admitted to murder while he throws up in a courtroom in at number 9.
Mosley became ill in court today after he pled guilty to aggravated murder and other charges. Prosecutors believe the reaction was a genuine sign of remorse.
So that was remorseful Timothy Mosley. Remorseful or not, he murdered 18-year-old Justin Michael Back in Waynesville, Warren County, Ohio. Justin Back was murdered at his family's home. Mosley took a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. So all Mosley had to do was give the court all the information they want of exactly what happened and what was his involvement in this murder. There was another teenager involved as well. He was identified as Austin Meyer. Austin was given the death sentence and he became the youngest inmate on death row in Ohio at the time. Meyer was sentenced to death at the age of 19 years old back in 2014. He is still currently on death row and his new execution date is in 2022. That is just absolutely insane. Do you guys think that teenagers should be allowed to be given the death penalty? Let me know in the comment section below. Alright, number 8.
In the direction of the deceased torso and lower extremities with that 2 times.
So that was a gangman who murdered 15-year-old Alessandro Guzman Feliz. The gunman was a part of the Dominican gang in the Bronx. So this death occurred in a mistaken identity, so the wrong person was killed according to all the testimonies. There was 12 suspects in this case. Right now there are 4 suspects in this case, including the guy who we just saw incarcerated at Rikers Island. They are segregated from other prisoners and they've been receiving heightened security protection at the prison due to receiving death threats from within the prison and even from their own gang members for killing an innocent teenager. So let's just say that being locked up right now might be the safest thing for these teenagers. Next up, number 7, we have a bunch of teenagers freaking out in court.
The end result, more individuals being taken into custody.
There was a group of teenagers who led police in a car chase after stealing a vehicle. These are some pretty serious crimes, but yet in the courtroom these teenagers were not taking the situation seriously. It just looks like they're all trying to impress each other.
At the hearing for 15-year-old Maurice Thomas, the suspected driver, and 15-year-old Thomas Butler, seen here smiling for our cameras, the pair seemed to show up to show out in front of a judge.
I think these kids have to be on drugs or something. And why are they giving gang signs in the courtroom? Next up, number 6, we have another teenager who might have taken a lot of drugs. It looks like this kid is going through withdrawal because he appeared in court shaking like crazy and it looks like he just can't control himself. So this right here is 17-year-old Jeffrey Hazelwood from Georgia, and you can see how much this kid is shaking in court. It looks like he can't control it. Hazelwood is accused of killing 2 teenagers behind a grocery store. He is facing a ton of serious criminal offenses. On top of the murder cases, Hazelwood will be facing aggravated assault, theft, and financial fraud charges as well. Hazelwood does not look mentally fit during the investigation and his hearing. There was actually a video of Jeffrey Hazelwood freaking out during an intense investigation where he said, "I didn't shoot them," but then as the video goes on, he says, "A voice in my head said to do it."
Running away the first time, after you shot them, running away.
Didn't shoot them.
Because the bad guy would have gotten you. That's the story that we're going with. The invisible bad guy that looks just like you.
So, contradicting himself a little bit, and he's admitting that he actually did it. I do hope this kid can get some serious help. Moving into number 5.
Come back again.
That was 18-year-old Penelope Soto, who appeared in court after she was arrested for possession of a prescription drug as Xanax. While in court, she decided to just laugh at the whole thing and cuss at the judge. Well, this turns out to be the wrong move.
It's not a joke, you know. We have not had any kind of drugs in the last 24 hours.
Actually,
Bye-bye.
Adios.
Come back, ma'am. Come back.
The judge upped the bail.
Count one will be 10,000.
Are you serious?
I am serious. Adios.
So after all of that happened, the teenager still didn't learn from that. The judge raised her bail to $10,000. He dismissed the teenager, but on her way out, this happens.
Come back again.
And the judge flipped.
What's up?
I believe I heard you saying to...
Yes, I did. I'm not going to the...
I believe you... Did you say me?
Actually, I
Did you say that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Oh, you did say that?
I'm not
I find you in direct criminal contempt. 30 days in the county jail.
I can't help but to laugh at this. This is just stupidity, and hopefully this is a lesson learned. Alright, number 4.
Indicate that Miss Me presents a flight risk, or that she would, with the conditions that we've proposed and any others that the court would add,
This video actually went viral because 15-year-old Jennifer Me was crying hysterically, and she was hiccuping as well. And now she is dubbed the Hiccup Girl. Piers Morgan actually interviewed the Hiccup Girl, talking about the crimes that she committed. She was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and this is for a gunshot murder despite not actually pulling the trigger herself. Jennifer Me was just with the wrong crowd of people. Moving into number 3.
When Luis Reyes learned that he'd be in jail for the next 30 years, you knew just by his body language the bailiffs would have to hold him.
That was Luis Reyes Jr., who was just sentenced to 30 years in prison after his very sinful act of sexually assaulting an 89-year-old woman. Is this real life right now? That is just sickening. Well, in court, when he found out his sentencing, he started to freak out and he had to be taken out of the court and restrained. The 89-year-old woman was actually there in the courtroom listening to the sentencing. The teen did apologize for what he has done, but the court didn't think Reyes had remorse, hence his sentencing. Number 2.
Brings 17-year-old Jacob Muzan and 18-year-old Drake Campbell to tears.
That was 17-year-old Jacob Muzan and 18-year-old Drake Campbell, who broke into tears in court. They were both being charged for murder, attempted murder, burglary, and 2 counts of armed robbery. Both of the teenagers only started crying when the judge denied their bonds due to a lack of emotion they gave during the trial. Both teens showed no remorse. One of the sisters spoke in court, and she apologized for him, and she knows that in their hearts they are breaking. So they're not showing any physical remorse, it's just all the remorse inside. I don't buy it. And finally, number 1, we have this. That actually sounded like a gunshot went off. I was actually really afraid when I watched this video. I was like, what the heck just happened? Well, that was 19-year-old Dexter Johnson from Texas, who had to be restrained from police officers after he decided to lunge towards the victim's family. I mean, haven't you done enough? This came just after he was sentenced to death, so he thought, you know what, there's nothing else to lose, let's just go hurt some more people. Luckily, there was like 30 officers in that room. One of the county court deputies actually tackled, like he lunged and tackled Johnson to the ground. And that happened just before he was able to attack the family members.
And weed, and thought to do so by killing the grandmother and stealing her money and jewelry. Let me repeat that again. They killed an elderly woman all for pizza and weed. That's ridiculous. Well, both were found guilty, obviously, and sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole in 36 years. During Antonio's hearing, he breaks down while reading his statement. His lawyer then had to finish it for him.
I took away someone's mother, their grandma, sister, friend, when I had no right to do so.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Fernando Salgado. So in 2012, Fernando attacked one of his classmates with a weapon, and then he tried to insert another up the classmate's rectum. As a result, he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon and 1 count of attempted assault with a foreign object. After receiving his sentence, Fernando broke down. He can be heard begging to let go when he's seen fighting with the guards. He's resisting with all his might, trying not to be put in prison. In our fourth spot, we have Spencer Lewis. Spencer Lewis was involved in an armed robbery gone wrong. He attempted to rob two brothers of their weed, money, and video games, but Lewis ended up shooting and killing the two brothers. He said he got scared during the robbery and that's why he fired. On Spencer's hearing, he entered the court smirking, acting all cocky and confident, which later turned into tears.
The victim's family, I never went there with that intention of hurting them.
But after his little breakdown, he can be seen leaving the court, smirking once again to the camera. So was it all just an act? Maybe. Moving on to number 3, we have Keyshawn Mann. I think this teen has to be the youngest convict on the list. Keyshawn Mann was only 13 years old when he shot and killed his mother's boyfriend, Jermell Stokes. He claimed that the boyfriend was mistreating him. Back in 2012, Keyshawn grabbed his mother's handgun, snuck up behind Jermell, and shot him in the back of the head. But his defense argued that the shooting was accidental. After he received his sentence, the courtroom went crazy. Keyshawn's family members were yelling and screaming, saying that he's innocent. And then one man got tackled and then removed from the court. Coming in at number 2, we have the collapsing duo. In this video, you can see Erica Mae Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham both resisting being taken away after learning that they would spend the rest of their lives locked away. Now, Landon and I did react to this video in our courtroom freakout video, so go check that out. But now I did some research and found out what they were in for. So Erica and Shanita were convicted of killing a young girl back in 2009. Apparently they were looking after her, but instead were torturing her for 2 weeks straight. That just makes me sick to my stomach. Well, in this video you can see the two flop to the floor and refuse to get up after hearing their sentence. In fact, one of the girls had to be placed in a chair and rolled away. While this is all happening, one of the girls' mothers is just completely freaking out. It was just complete madness in that courtroom. And in our number 1 spot, we have Shondell Jackson. In 2009, 19-year-old Shondell Jackson was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and robbery of a university student, Nathan Potter. During the attempted robbery of Potter, Jackson and his partner fatally shot him to death. During most of his trial, Jackson kept his cool. He showed no remorse for his actions, and at one point he even turned and smiled at the victim's family. But after being sentenced to life in prison, his demeanor quickly changed. Apparently he became angry and started cursing at the judge. He stood up to leap at the judge, but officers were there to quickly take him down and then pepper spray him.
Starting us off on this list, in at number 10, we have a teenager, Aaron Schmidt, who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for murdering his 14-year-old neighbor, Elena Callahan. If for some reason Schmidt outlived his sentence, he will have an additional 5 years on his sentence. So that 5-year sentence will run consecutively after any other sentencing he might receive in the future for a possession charge. He will also have another 10 years of his sentence for theft, and again that's going to start after all of his other sentencing has been completed. After sentencing, it was actually appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court due to what in people's opinions were saying the sentence was cruel and an unusual punishment. But the judge rejected all the arguments in court and said he finds the evidence it was sufficient enough to find Schmidt guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of his crimes, and the punishment, it fit the crime. Number 9.
We have breaking team coverage this evening. One of the brothers accused of murdering his 5 family members in Broken Arrow will spend the rest of his life in prison.
This right here is 16-year-old Michael Beaver, who with his older brother Robert Beaver killed their parents and 3 siblings during a spree. Is this real life right now? This is just so messed up. So now, living a life without his parents, he will see the inside of a prison cell for the rest of his life. Beaver's 2 younger sisters, one being just 5 years old, was attacked in what was described as the worst single criminal event in the history of Broken Arrow City in Oklahoma. I mean, that is just so messed up. Beaver was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder for his role in the killing. siblings. His lawyer did try to defend Michael Beaver, saying that it was his older brother that planned and led the murder. His older brother he took a plea deal to his crimes and he was sentenced to life without parole. By pleading guilty, Michael's older brother Robert avoided the death penalty. Michael Beaver was also sentenced. His lawyers couldn't get him off the hook to this traumatizing event. Number 8.
Now at the heart of all of today's proceedings was the issue of parole. Judge Edward Lukemeyer, who's presiding over the case, said at the outset that the issue is determining whether White fits in what he called the narrow subset of juveniles who deserve a life sentence without parole.
Well, for teenager Dakota White, he fit the narrow subset of juveniles who deserves a life sentence without parole, according to a judge. It seemed like Dakota didn't feel remorse for what he has done during a few recording phone calls of him bragging about his murder that he committed. There didn't seem like a chance of rehabilitating this teenager, so that's when he was given the harsh sentence. During the trial, it only took jurors about 15 minutes to come up with the deliberation of guilty. He was found guilty of stabbing and stringing Sam Poss to death. He was just 17 years old at the time of the murder. Number 7. We have 17 years old at the time of his crime, Joseph Spencer. He pleaded guilty to 3 first-degree murder charges in the deaths of his parents, and this is during Labor Day weekend. Joseph went on a killing spree. He was given 2 life sentences after he was tried as an adult. He will have to serve 2 life sentences concurrently, so one after another. And then when that's done, he has to serve his 3rd sentence. Spencer's dad was a UPS pilot, his mom was a science teacher, and I'm pretty sure this kid deserves to never see the light of day. Moving into number 6, we have 14-year-old Colton Glenn Orr. And he was 14 at the time of his crime. He pleaded guilty for shooting and killing his father's fiancée, Laura Hendricks, and this took place in their home. He was sentenced to life in prison. Right after the murder took place, the teenager just walked into a police station and he confessed everything he has done. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals ruled that Orr should be tried as an adult, so he was given life in prison. Right now there are appeals to try to have this teen tried as a juvenile, but that's most likely going to be denied. Orr's lawyers are trying to argue that abuse that was done to him was the reason that drove him to commit these awful crimes, but that was quickly discredited. At least now he's gonna have a very long time to think about what he has done. Number 5.
Robert, we do begin with breaking news for our viewers in the West. We want to show you these pictures. Aerial shot of a middle school in Noblesville, Indiana. What has become a familiar scene. Students appear to be evacuating, running from their own school after reports that there has been a shooter there at Noblesville West Middle School.
Hearing about school shootings, it really upsets me, and I'm sure it upsets a lot of you guys. It seems way too common. Teens seem to be able to get their hands on guns like way too easily. There has to be some sort of gun control laws that makes it harder for citizens of America to get guns, or just even ban them altogether. I know it's a huge debate. There hasn't been a mass shooting in Australia who's banned guns like 20 years ago, but I know it would be close to impossible to ban all guns in America. Going back to this story, we have a 13-year-old in which his identity, we actually don't know it. He is a minor, so his identity is protected under the law, in which I think is kind of stupid when you think about it. This teen was capable of committing murder. Why then we're trying to protect him? Well, he will remain in the state's juvenile detention system until he's 18 years old, and then he's going to be transferred to an adult prison where he's going to serve out the rest of his sentence. Because he showed no remorse for what he has done, it's likely the teen will never leave prison. Moving into number 4, we have Taylor Lane Gwaltney, who was just 19 years old when he committed the murder, and then he bragged about it. The took place in Colorado Springs, where the teen attacked a homeless man with a baseball bat. The homeless man was 55-year-old Doyle, who was beaten to death. Doyle was discovered earlier that morning, partially wrapped in a sleeping bag. He had been hit on the head at least 4 to 7 times. During the trial, a 7-man, 5-woman jury took just 2 hours to convict him. The hearing trial did take 3 weeks, so the jury had to listen in onto some pretty horrifying details about the crime. Well, the teen was convicted of the and he was sentenced to life in prison, and he showed absolutely no remorse for what he has done. He bragged to 16 people about the murder. Well, at least he is now living in the right place for the rest of his life. Next up, number 3, we have 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey, who was just found guilty of 4 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated burglary, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of gross abuse of a corpse. Is this real life right now? What does that even mean? Gross abuse of a corpse. Let's not think about it. Well, Ramsey killed 98-year-old Margaret Douglas, which is just so sickening. I mean, poor woman who lived so long only to be murdered. This kid is just sick.
A sentence tonight for the Medina County teenager who broke into the home of a 98-year-old woman, videotaped her sleeping before killing her and her body.
Ramsey was given life in prison.
He left in chains, where he'll remain for life without parole, for the teenager who robbed a 98-year-old from reaching her dream of 100.
Moving into number 2.
The court, having duly considered your offenses, it is hereby ordered that you be committed to the Department of Youth Services until the age of 21, and furthermore committed to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction for the period of not less than 25 years.
So that was Philip Chisholm at the age of 14 years old. He was found guilty on many charges. He his 24-year-old math teacher. Chisholm was ordered to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. He started his sentence at a juvenile facility. Once he turns 21 years old, he's then going to be transferred to a maximum adult prison where he will serve out the rest of his sentence. Chisholm was found guilty on many charges. He was sentenced to 25 years for premeditated murder. Once that sentence is complete, he will then have to serve another sentence of 40 years for armed robbery. Once that sentence is complete, so that's about 65 years at this point, he's going to have another 40-year sentence for armed robbery. After he's done that, he's going to have another 40-year sentence. And it's not done yet. After that sentence, if this teen is still alive at the age of 79 years old, he's going to have to serve his last sentence of so that is another 40 years. This teen will have to become the world's oldest person to be able to be released from prison at the age of 119 years old. Finally, number 1, we have 10-year-old Antonio Barbo, who was charged with killing his great-grandmother in her Wisconsin home. He also had a friend help with the Barbo and his friend decided to try to steal money from 78-year-old Barbara Olson, but things took a turn and a robbery, it turned into a scene. They took turns beating her with a hatchet and hammer.
Sentencing was held today for a teenager convicted in a crime that rattled Sheboygan County and fiercely divided a family. Antonio Barbo learned he'll be a middle-aged man before he gets a chance at parole for killing his great-grandmother.
There doesn't seem to be much remorse, so I'm not sure if this kid will ever get out of prison. After Barbo and his friend committed the murder, they actually decided to go out and enjoy some pizza. These are not behaviors of remorse. Barbo's attorney was shocked when Barbo was given a life sentence. He believes that kids, especially at the age of just 10 years old, shouldn't be given a life sentence. But you know what? If you're capable of doing the crime, then I think you should be old enough, and capable enough to do the time.
Our statutes, the way they're standing right now, 10-year-old facing life in prison, I don't understand that. They aren't adults, they're children.
Let's start off at number 10 with the teenager who you saw in the intro. Well, that was Conrad Schaefer, who was sentenced to life in prison for a double fatal shooting spree that he went on back in 2013. He was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison, but in 25 years he is entitled to have his sentence reviewed and it could be shortened. Something tells me that we shouldn't shorten this teenager's sentencing.
My family and I had no intention to forgive the guilty because of such a heinous and brutal crime that was done to my grandson.
This teen went on a murdering spree, killing as many people as he could, but for some reason he's asking for leniency. I mean, buddy, did you give leniency to all the people that you gunned down? So he asked for leniency, pleading that he is sorry for what he has done.
I know if I was in your position, I'd feel the same way. I was 15 at the time. I'm really sorry for the things I've done. And I know I did wrong, and I know my apologies don't mean nothing to you. And I know it ain't gonna change how you feel about me. But I just feel like I need to apologize, and I really am sorry for what I've done.
Yeah, I'm totally not buying it. The guy looks like he has no emotions whatsoever on his face. I mean, you ain't sorry. Alright, number 9. This right here is Alyssa Bustamante, and she wrote in a diary, and I quote, "I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the oh my god, it's pretty enjoyable. Is this real life right now? Well, hopefully prison is just as enjoyable because you're gonna be calling that place home for a very long time." She's in there after she committed a murder. Bustamante was raised by her grandparents because her mother had a history of drug and alcohol abuse, which led to charges and jail time, and her father was also in jail. He was in jail for assault, so I guess Alyssa didn't fall too far from the apple tree because she's in prison for life for murdering her 9-year-old neighbor just for the thrill of it. Well, she wrote this: "I just effing killed someone, I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them, now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment, it was kind of amazing." Then she wrote, "I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL. Well, hopefully this teen can have all the time that she needs to, think about her behavior in prison. I think we should give her the rest of her life. Like, give her all the time she needs." From there, let's go to number 8. This is 17-year-old Adrian Zellimer, who pleaded guilty to murder a 10-year-old girl who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after 40 years. This came after a plea deal. The 17th Judicial District Attorney Dave Young said this: "In 27 years as a prosecutor, I've never seen a 15-year-old commit such a violent act. This attorney must have seen a lot in his days, especially if he's listening to murder cases all day. And for the attorney to come out with a statement like this is insane. How does a 15-year-old even have it in them to, commit such an awful crime?" At number 7, we have Russell Burrell, who pleaded guilty to a murder. He was alongside 3 other people who committed the murder, and he was sentenced to 6 life sentences in prison plus 10 years. He was the teen we talked about in the intro of this video. Burrell murdered 3 people: Shamika Barris, Michael Martin, and Damian Collin. This was a planned murder in order to steal money and drugs.
Let us be clear, 19-year-old Russell Burrell, who was a juvenile at the time of the murders, was the one who emptied 17 rounds into 3 human beings, and today was his last day in civilized society for the rest of his natural life.
Alright, number 6. We have Shane Thompson, who was 17 years old at the time he committed murder, while he was sentenced to 110 years in prison.
And pleaded guilty to 39-year-old Evelyn Njai during a September 25, 2013 robbery attempt at this Rickers BP located on West 38th Street.
So that wasn't the only crime he committed. He was charged and convicted of murder, robbery, and sexual assault.
Prior to that, Thompson broke into the home of this woman and sexually assaulted her while her husband and sons were held at gunpoint.
This is so sickening, it's hard to even read this. This teenager deserved every moment of that 110 years prison sentence. Thompson is obviously not a normal person. When he was sentenced, he seemed pretty happy about it.
The man he killed, Derek Thomas, has that story.
Why is this guy smiling? Number 5.
17-year-old Raceland Martin entered the courtroom handcuffed with his feet in shackles. He sat and appeared to be listening intently to testimony, occasionally nervously looking.
That was 17-year-old Raceland Martin, who murdered his grandfather with a hatchet. Martin was 15 years old when he planned the murder of his grandfather. When this kid was in court, he was shaking like crazy.
The defense, however, arguing his client did not have a normal upbringing, functioning as an adult when he should have been treated like a child.
I don't know if you guys saw that, so let's take a look again.
As an adult when he should have been treated like a child.
Why is this teenager scared now? Martin received a life sentence and he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. He has a chance of setting the record for being the longest serving inmate in prison because he committed an awful crime at such a young age. And he's not getting out until he passes away in prison. So let's see if he can set the record. Number 4, we actually have someone else who killed an elderly person. This right here is 17-year-old teen who 98-year-old Margaret Douglas. She was in her home when the incident happened, and the teenager tried to hide her body in the closet. In court, he tried to apologize for what he did.
"I'm so sorry for what I did. I constantly live in regret and shame because of it."
It's been 9 months since these hands committed those acts on...
The only reason why the teen is apologizing is because his lawyers told him to, in an attempt to get a reduced sentencing. But luckily, it never worked. Those fake tears, the words did nothing for him. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 3, we have Savon Shmush, who pleaded guilty to killing his half-sister. Shmush was only 16 years old at the time when he murdered her in their home. He her and dumped her body near a lake so no one can find out. He tried to get away with the crime.
Photos of her smiling face and memories. A young life taken away at the hands of a half-brother who her family says she loved.
He was convicted and sentenced up to 100 years in prison, so because he took a plea deal, he does have a chance of being released from prison when he's 116 years old. This teen has no sympathy whatsoever, so you know what? Why should we? If you can live to 116, then we'll let you out. No problems there. In court, he was asked if he has anything to say, and he just said no. Number 2.
sharing their thoughts with the teenager who admitted to it all, Aiden Von Grabo.
How do you wish to plead to count 2? Guilty, Your Honor.
Von Grabo taking a guilty plea for first-degree murder and a long list of other crimes, including attempting to murder Michaela's younger sister.
Why is this teen so evil? This took place in northern Colorado, and the teen was given life in prison. The person he was Michaela Grote, who was just 20 years old. And apparently she wasn't the only one on his death list that he created. I mean, what the heck is that? He had intentions of killing many more people. He was only 16 years old when he was charged with first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, attempted first-degree arson, extortion, 2 counts of felony menacing, 3 counts of stalking, 3rd-degree assault of an at-risk person, criminal mischief, and telephone harassment. I mean, that is a mouthful to go through. It's just unbelievable that one person, and I should say not just one person, one teenager was capable of doing. Finally, number 1.
Buffalo teen who killed a man and then set his house on fire to cover up the crime is heading.
Next, we're talking about a 19-year-old kid who spent 20 years to life in prison. He was convicted of murdering 15-year-old Brian Dombick.
19-year-old David Myers may very well spend the rest of his days in a prison cell. He spoke before his sentence, apologizing to his victim's family and his own.
If I could go back and make up for what I did, I would. I'll give a arm and a leg.
This might be one teenager who actually felt sorry for what he has done and is willing to deal with the consequences.
I agree. I do deserve to be incarcerated. I committed a crime, and that's all.
So don't get me wrong, I still don't feel bad for him.